God's morality is the difference between a childhood dream and a dirty old man's scheme. There was a man, most people in our world didn't know this man. Most of us didn't know who he was. And then all of a sudden, inside of a week or two, he hit the newspapers and everybody in the world knew his name. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody had an understanding of the name Jeffrey Epstein. Suddenly the whole world knew Jeffrey Epstein. They all knew him. Everybody talked about him. He had a private plane. Have you ridden on Jeffrey Epstein's plane? And suddenly everybody was trying to get rides on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. And they were all going on his plane. Have you ridden on Jeffrey Epstein's plane? Have you ridden on Jeffrey Epstein's plane? Have you ridden on Jeffrey Epstein's plane? He had a plane, a big jet, and he flew people all over. And he had this palatial estate. It looked like a palace. It was big. It was beautiful. It was on a tropical island. It was surrounded by palm trees. It was surrounded by coconut trees. It had an ocean shore that just broke right in front of it. You could stand there in the house and you could see the beauty of where it was in this tropical paradise. And everybody wanted to get to Jeffrey Epstein's house. They wanted to see this tropical paradise. They wanted to take a look and be there. And he had a private plane. And he had people who wanted to be there with him. And he had people paying big, big money to be there. Rich people were paying to be there. Technocrats with giant corporations were paying to be there. Ex-presidents were paying to be there. Lords from England were paying to be there. Everybody wanted to go. Everybody wanted to know. Everybody wanted to be with Jeffrey Epstein, who was there. He had a beautiful paramour named Giselle Maxwell, and she was a paramour, and she was also a procurer who would get the girls to be girls. She would teach young girls how to be girls, as they understood it. And Jeffrey Epstein had a black book. Are you in Jeffrey Epstein's black book? They're now saying that he was tied to the CIA. They're now saying that he may have been tied to Mossad. They're now saying he may have been tied to international intrigue. And yet the heart of the story is quite simple. It's that God's law is the difference between a childhood dream and a dirty old man's scheme. It's all in the law of God. Notice how the text lays it out. Now I want to point out this text is in the Bible. This text in the Bible is about David, who was the king of Israel in the Bible. And it said that David was old. Now, I don't think old has a lot to do with age, because you take a look at Donald Trump, he's old, but man, he thinks sharp, he knows what he's doing, he's very together. You take a look at Joe Biden, and all of it, it's like the picture of Dorian Gray. All of the difficulties, the problems, and the evils of his life have kind of fallen upon him, and he is showing the age that he has well before anything. And David the king was old. He got to be an old man, and he was stricken with years. The years caught up with him. He was a good man. He was after God's own heart. He was a king, but he still got old. That offers us hope because we're all going to get old one day. It's going to happen. You're going to get old. And they covered him with many covers. They put blankets on top of blankets. They put pads on top of pads. They put all this together to heat him. But he could get no heat. He got no heat because his body was generating no heat. His blood pressure was way down, and he felt cold all the time. And he shivered, and he shook, and he had the chills. He had low blood pressure with his age, and he never felt comfortable. Wherefore the servants, they loved him. He said, this was a good man. We've served him. He's loved us. We've loved him. Wherefore, that means because he was so cold. Wherefore, let us search and let us seek out and let us find a young virgin. Notice two qualities. First, she's got to be young. He's old. They want somebody young, so she'll be hot. Or at least warm. You know, she'll have good blood pressure. She'll be warm. And she'll warm him. She'll be young, therefore she's warm. And she has to be a virgin. She has to be pure. This is the childhood dream. To be young, to be hot, to be warm, and to be pure. And so this was the two characteristics that they had for this girl that they were going to seek for the king. One, she had to be young, so she could be warm. That was her basic quality. And two, she had to be a virgin so she could be pure, because they wanted the king. See, the law of God can make a big difference in the life of a person. You can be put in difficult circumstances. You can be put in hard circumstances. But if you got the law of God, it will protect you even in the hard circumstances. The problem with many of us were put in hard circumstances. We weren't at that time that close to the law of God. We didn't know what was the best thing that God wanted for us. We didn't know how to be perfect in God. And so the law of God was not as close as it should have been to protect us. We spent a lot of years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I've seen people spend 40, 50 years digging out of the difficulties of their childhood because they didn't have the law of God when they were kids. And so, they sought a young girl who would be pure. And in this, we see that the law of God protects a childhood's pure dreams. And they said, let her stand before the king. That's a pretty important thing. Let her stand before the king. What that meant is she should have an intimate knowledge of everything that he knew. She would hear every conversation that he had. She would hear every secret that every individual told him. She would be there when the secretaries of state and the others came to him for counseling, for advice. She would stand there and she would listen, and she would be bound by the law of God, that she could do it and do it in a pure way. She would be there for him, and she would stand in the gap in front of him, and she would always stand. She'd never be asked to leave because so-and-so is coming. She'd never be asked to leave because so-and-so is going to be here. No, she would stand before the king. She was intimate, and she knew all things about him. She knew all things about him. She knew the personal things about him. You know, sometimes it's better when a lot of other people don't know our personal things. Sometimes you think somebody's really cool till you hear the personal things, then you think they're not so cool. But she knew all of the intimate things about him. And she had to stand there. And she knew the personal things. And she knew the professional things. Because even as an ex-king, people came to him and they questioned him and they talked to him and they gave a lot of state secrets away. And she heard all of this and she knew all things about him. That's what the job was going to require. And let her cherish him. Let her cherish him. Her job was that she had one goal, that she should care for him. Not make jokes about the old man. Not laugh when he did something stupid. Not fall into temptation, because that wasn't her job. She was there to care for him. She was to give him attention when he needed attention, whatever it was. She was the one who would be there. She was to give him affection. She was to be affectionate. And she was to give him attraction. She had this calling that she should be. I think she had to have a spark. You know what I mean? She had to have a spark. She just kind of had to be personable so that she could lift him up when he needed lifting, and she could talk to him when he needed talking, and she could be there for him. Do you realize what a difficult position this was and how fraught it was with temptation? Do you realize how fraught her life was? How many young men were trying to get close to her? How many rich men were trying to bribe her? How many powerful men wanted the secrets that she had? And her life was fraught with temptation. And I pray to God that our younger generation will have the law of God so interwoven in their heart, so tied within their mind. They will have the law of God, that they will have the same kind of understanding of what it's like to live a life under God when the whole culture around you is going to hell. When the whole culture around you is being destroyed. Her job was to cherish him. I don't like to use the word love because that has a different understanding for us. And let her lie in his bosom. Is that what it really says? Yeah. I hope my Bible's different than Susan's was, because hers sounded a lot smoother than mine. If she had to lie in his bosom, he had to lie in her bosom. That's how intimate the job was. How do you have a job like that and you keep it under the law of God? I mean, that was a pretty personal job, wasn't it? Let her lie under they're laying out a job description here. They're laying out a job description, and I'll tell you, that's a pretty close job description. This is the point where I usually bring up with people that you're the first generation. You are the first generation that dated in the back seat of a car. I know that because I was too. I know that because I was too. We thought we had discovered something new in a new Chevy, in a new Ford, in a Chrysler convertible with the top down. We thought we had discovered something new. The more you have, the more temptation there is. And let her lie in his bosom, and let her cherish him. What a job description. Do you realize what a mess this job description would have been without the law of God? We're going to get there. That the king may get heat. Oh boy. You hardly dare read this to a teenage boy. Whatever you do, don't read it to a 13-year-old kid. Because he'll get a totally different perspective on what is going on in the text. That the king may get bodily physical heat from this. Now, I'm trying to think when I saw it. I saw a movie on the Third Reich. And in the Third Reich, in the concentration camps, they were trying to figure out how close you could push a person to death and not kill them. So they would take prisoners from the concentration camp and they would put them in in pans of ice water. Big ice cubes floating all around in the water, and they would stick them in there till they were almost dead, and they would check them until they were almost dead. They would leave them there till they were almost dead. Then they will take them out, and they would throw them back in the prison compound, ready for tomorrow's experiment. And the people in the prison compound, they would take off all their clothes, and they would take this person and take off all his wet clothes, and then they would all hug together, and they would all cuddle together, trying to bring back into him the heat of life, trying to bring back into him the spirit of life, trying to bring back into him that which they had taken away from him. Notice that the king may get heat. Notice, this was simply a physical exchange. It was not a spiritual thing. And they understood it. And she understood it. So they sought for a fair damsel all the coasts of Israel. They looked at the entire land of Israel, and they sought for a fair damsel. Fair doesn't mean she would cheat. She wouldn't cheat on the test. Fair meant she was gorgeous. She was beautiful. She was absolutely wonderful. And she won. This girl won. Now notice the girl who won. And the girl who won, they found Abishag. Now, Abishag means something like, Daddy is a wandering guy. Daddy is a lost man. Daddy is gone. They found a girl who did not have a good relationship with her father because he was gone to a large degree from her life. And so they took this girl who didn't necessarily have a good relationship with her father because he wasn't there and close and ready. They took this girl and they brought her to the king. Now, what do we have here? We have David, who started off his life with Bathsheba. You all heard that story, right? And then you have this girl who didn't have a good relationship with her father because he was sort of gone out of her life. You take these two broken people and you bring them together, and you could expect a lot of evil to happen except for one thing. They had the law of God. They had God's law protecting what they were doing. They had God's law guiding what they were going through. They had God's law working for both of them for the good of the nation of Israel. He had God's law as a king. He had learned something since Bathsheba. She did not allow the fact that she didn't have a good relationship with her father. I think what happened was she developed a good relationship with David as her father, as a replacement father, because the father wasn't there the way he should have been. And instead of taking the brokenness and living for that, they took the goodness and they lived for that. And they developed a giving, caring, sharing relationship where she gave to him and he gave to her, and they never violated the principle. Culture would not have seen it this way. Culture would not have pushed it this way. We could have justified, David could have justified having sex with her. He could have, but he didn't. He had a higher purpose in mind. And it says that he never made love to her. He never made love to her. He told her all his secrets. He let her in on everything that was going on. He let her in on all the stuff that was taking place in the kingdom. She knew everything that was happening. She knew who was who and what was what. And they never violated. They never violated because they had the law of God to protect them. God, if only America could get the law of God back to protect us. We've thrown it out piece by piece. We got rid of the Sabbath. We got rid of adultery. We got rid of parenting. We got rid of stealing. We got rid of coveting when we started doing advertising. We've gotten rid of all these commandments that were designed to protect us, and we got rid of them all, and if just they would come back and protect us. And they brought her to the king. This is her. This is him. And they brought them together, and she was very, very, very fair. That didn't mean she was an honest person. That meant she was gorgeous. And she cherished the king. She loved him as only a daughter can. She loved him as only a family member can. She loved him as only a child can to an adult when the relationship is pure under God. If only the younger generation in America could come to understand the purity and the blessing that God had. And she ministered unto him. I believe that means, ministry to me is you meet whatever need the need happens to be. Whatever the need comes along, that's the need that happens to be. That's the need that takes place. If somebody comes to you and you're hungry, you give them food. If they're thirsty, you give them something to drink. If they're in prison, you visit them. If they're lonely, if they're lost, I will tell you something. More people have been attacked, brutalized, misrepresented, told how bad they were by their family, by those friends when they're growing up. They have just absolutely been beaten down as they were growing up, and then they came to Tikva, Israel, and they learned what it was like for somebody to love you and God. Everybody needs to know what it's like to be loved in God. In spite of the temptations, loved like God. In spite of the expectations, in spite of what the whole community is saying, loved by God. See, and when you know that you are loved in God, it does something to heal. It does something to firm. It does something to put it back together. And she ministered unto all his needs. All his needs. But the king never knew her. And this is the biblical term of knowledge that when you have sex with somebody, you get to the very inner part of life. One of the real problems we have with dating in our society is that people in our society, they have sex first, then they spend the rest of their relationship trying to figure out how to justify the sex that they had. They had it, they got there, now they're trying to make sense out of how they got there, and God says, by the way, you never should have got there. The only thing going to straighten you out is forgiveness. Back to God. Lord, I'm sorry. I handled it at the cross, take care of it. And it says, and he never knew her. He treated her like a father. He treated her like a child. He treated her like a daughter. I'll bet he treated her better than any of the kids that were biologically his. The king never knew her because he was training her to be a wife for the next king. That's family business. That's family relationship. And you see, that's what takes place when God's law is at the center of a relationship. How many of us can look back at our life and we look at 3, 4, 5 points in our life, whereas if God's law had guided those, we would have made different and better choices, and we would have had a much easier road to go than the one that we went. And David kept her. He had every right to take her, but he kept her. He trained her. He blessed her. He taught her for the new king. Isn't that what a father's supposed to do? Isn't that what a family is supposed to do? And by God, isn't that what Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to do under God and didn't do? We have so many bad illustrations in our world. Thank God we got one good one in the Ruach HaKodesh. We can all find peace and purity and forgiveness and goodness in Christ to start over. Amen. Will you rise for the Aaronic benediction?